All right, we're moving right along here. Next up is Matt Sanaki, designing emails. He is going to go in deep about that. I think Matt actually shared a fun fact with me that his band opened for the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. So my question, Matt, is have you ever knocked on wood? Let's go.
Wow. Cool. Thank you. And yeah, thanks for having me. I want to thank Klaviyo and Diana and Agatha in particular, who have been great about welcoming me here. And it's true. Here I am, rocking out on stage about 6 months ago with my high school band, reliving our glory years, opening up for the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. And I'm actually going to be using this pink method as a visual cue moving forward, so watch out for that. But I asked the guys to come out today to play for you guys, and unfortunately they couldn't make it, so that's probably a good thing for all of you. So I want to start off with 3 burning questions. Are you confused when you're designing your emails and you don't know where to start? Do you have some skills but get lost when it comes to layout, type, and things like button placement? And are you worried you might actually be doing something wrong and killing your conversions in the process? Well, congrats, you're in the right place. My name is Matt, and for the next 20, 25 minutes, we're going to shift gears and really zoom out and just talk about the design of your emails, along with some actionable tips on how you can increase engagement, click-through rates, and ultimately on-site conversions. Just a quick aside about me, I run an email marketing agency out of New York City called Mineral.io, and we're a Klaviyo Platinum partner. Now, I do want to set some expectations for this talk. We're going to be talking mostly about design, and what we're not going to be talking about are the following: segmentation, personalization, copywriting, and really this is where you should start your efforts in terms of optimizing your campaigns. And I know there's been plenty of talks about this to date through this conference, and clearly we're all at a Klaviyo conference. We know the importance of these things, but this is really where you should start. But I just want to set the precedent that we're not going to be diving into these topics today. Also, I just want to set expectations. They're only going to be talking about one type of email here. We're not going to be talking about long-form sales letters or textual-based emails, which in my experience sometimes far outperform any kind of visual-based email. But we're only going to be talking about what I call a promo email here. Certainly some of these principles will apply to the design of your flows and things of that sort, transactional emails in some instances. But again, we're just going to keep this simple and just talk about promo emails. All good? Cool. So here we go. 5 conversion-centric design principles, along with some actionable tips on how you can increase engagement, click-through rates, and conversions. Number 1. Now, before I dig in here, I really want to just point out 2 books that had a strong influence on me and my design career. The first one's called The Paradox of Choice. It's by Barry Schwartz. And the second one is called Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. Essentially, both of these books share a central tenet, and that's that more choice equals suffering. Sounds very doom and gloom, and essentially more choice equals paralysis. This is the reason why you see Mark Zuckerberg only wearing gray t-shirts, and Obama, he just has a closet full of blue suits. They're essentially just removing choices in their day-to-day regime to facilitate their actions moving forward. So what do these heady psychological concepts have to do with email design? Well, it turns out the same psychology actually applies. Too much of everything can actually be a bad thing. And I think this is just a great place to start from. A promo email, I've blurred out the major brand, just to not point a wagging finger at anybody in particular, but this is what I would call a kitchen sink email. And I've seen this so many times before where you're just like, if I can just jam more and more promos and more offers into this one campaign and then just fire it off in a spray and pray campaign, hopefully something will come together and somebody will process this and take action on it. And it's really not what you want to do. If you do feel an inclination to do that, I'd urge you to revisit segmentation again. So our number one principle for conversion-centric design here is what I'd like to call reducing the cognitive load. Another fancy pants term. So let's take a look at some emails. We could all look at emails on the left-hand panel, and then take a look at those emails on the right-hand side. See if you can pick out any kind of common patterns, techniques, layouts, messaging. Compare those on the left to those on the right. I think we can all agree, those on the left, way easier to digest. So, given these psychological concepts, how do we actually take this when it comes time to lay out our emails in Klaviyo? So I'm going to introduce just a few tactics for each principle, and I think this will be great just to give you some actionable advice moving forward. So the first one, we're starting at a really high level here, is simply just limit offers. This is tactic number one. Your campaigns are going to be far more effective if you can actually hone in on one particular offer as opposed to the kitchen sink approach. Get rid of any unnecessary links, design elements, any other distractions. You really just want to focus on one and only one conversion goal. A few examples. I think these are great. Away Baggage, Benchmark, and the Herman Miller store. As you can see, just one offer per email. Interesting case study done by Herman Miller. An A/B test done by Herman Miller. They actually tested 4 CTAs in one email versus 1 in the next, and experienced a 42% increase in clicks. And again, like all these things, these aren't written in stone. These aren't, this isn't the words that you need to move forward with for all of your campaigns, but it is a good place to start from and a consideration moving forward. I would urge you to test these concepts against your existing campaigns. Here's another concept just called the attention ratio. It's essentially the same thing. And it's just helpful to acknowledge this, wherein the attention ratio is the number of links to number of campaign conversion goals. Ideally speaking, in a perfect world, in an optimized campaign, it's 1-to-1. So we're looking for 1-to-1 moving forward. Again, we're looking at the first principle for conversion-centric design, and that's reducing the cognitive load. Very simple tactic number 2, using 2 fonts only. I mean, this is like typography 101. But in my experience, working with some smaller teams, like maybe, for all I know, you might have like an intern or you're new to Klaviyo and you just need some help and direction. This is a good place to start. Just use 2 fonts moving forward. 1 font's fine, 2 fonts is great. More than 2 fonts, things are going to get a little bit nutty. All right, so I talked about rock and roll, and I had my big introduction where I talked about my band opening up for the Mighty Boston, so I thought I'd throw in some more Boston rock stuff. Granted, I bet 60% of you are from out of town. This is Joe Perry, and during his songwriting sessions with Steven Tyler, of course, Joe Perry's from Boston, Steven Tyler's from Boston, they're in this huge band called Aerosmith. And in their songwriting sessions, he would constantly say to Steven Tyler, hurry up, don't bore us, get to the chorus. It's actually a reference to a Roxette album, but he's known for just ramming this home in his songwriting sessions with Aerosmith. And I think it really epitomizes what you want to do in your messaging for your promo emails. That's tactic number 3. Really simple stuff. Write short, scannable copy. Just drill it down to the core essence of your marketing. So of course, long copy definitely has its place. Anything that requires a technical explanation, anything high value, you could explore longer copy. Something that's you're going to need to persuade your end user with. But all said, always test it against something that's, say, 5 sentences or less. Just 2 quick tools that we really like whenever we're revising copy. 5sentences.es, or 5sentence, how can I pronounce that? And the Hemingway editor. These are great online tools that you can just jam in your copy off the bat, and then it'll help you drill it down to 5 sentences and the core essence of what you're trying to say. So a very heady term, reducing the cognitive load. Let's just do a quick little recap. Limit promo offers, stick to 2 fonts, make copy bite-sized. Really easy stuff. So let's go into the second principle here. A couple of stats. The average office worker gets 121 emails a day and spends 28% of their work week managing their inbox. It's a lot of time. Everyone is basically just getting destroyed by digital media. It's estimated that marketers have only about 8 seconds to make an impression. So the central question here, full well knowing that people are distracted and pressed for time when they process their emails, how do we actually design emails so they're quick to consume while highlighting our offers and getting that on the front center stage? So the answer, it comes down to a clear visual hierarchy. So I started with the first principle really at a high level, and right now I'm going to get a little bit more granular and talk about how to actually lay out your campaigns. This is the central tenet of the second principle. We want to show readers the way with layout. Here's how. Tactic number 1, very simple, make it scannable. Break up your content. Show readers what's what. Another typography hack, leverage headings, subheadings, body copy, bold text. Give weight to certain things that are more important than others. Again, what you want to do here is make it easy to scan. And when that person opens up their email, they know what's what. Quick little test. Let's take a look at these figures. Figure 1, figure 2. I think we can all agree, figure 2. Everybody immediately gets it. So tactic 2, prioritize your offers. This is a fairly advanced layout, but it does show how we can prioritize offers, starting with the most important at the top, and then in terms of diminishing significance, down to secondary offers. Tactic 3, this is a layout, believe it or not, but before you get too complicated, I'd urge you just to try a 1-column layout. And naturally, something like this just guides the reader along. It almost puts the blinders on, and they have nowhere else to look but your actual offer. So I really like this layout. I'm going to talk about 3 different layouts here. This is tactic number 4. And you've probably seen this a bazillion times. Maybe you don't know the actual name. But now that you know the actual name, you're going to recognize that almost every email you receive that you have a favorable impression of leverages this technique. And it's called the inverted pyramid. Draw users in, delivers the goods. And what we're doing here is we're directing people towards CTA at the bottom. I call it anchoring on a CTA. Couple more offers. Here's tactic number 5. You've probably seen this a million times. We call it the zigzag. Again, another great way to use some directional cues and guide the user through the process. This is especially helpful if you have lots of imagery and you want to make things a little bit more dynamic. So what about multiple offers? I realized in principle number 1, I really hopefully rammed home the idea of dialing things into actually one offer. But what if you're hell-bent on actually doing multiple offers? Or thematically, you have 3 or 4 different products that are naturally grouped together. Well, that's totally cool. And you might be confused, well, what do I do here? How do I, given the fact that I want to prioritize these things, how do I all get them in the same place at the same time? Well, you don't have to. What you can just do is stack your triangles. Just leverage the first layout over again. Drop the second one down, and then continue along. Having trouble? This is just a good test to kind of spot check your work. Use the squint test. Clearly, using the squint test, looking at the example on the right, we can easily see the prioritization of offers and text. So let's recap this. How do we create visual hierarchy, break up content, make it scannable, use font size and weights, start with a 1-column layout, and if you get more advanced than that, try the inverted pyramid, the zigzag approach, or stack triangles to guide your readers to your CTA. All right. Now we've talked about layouts. I want to talk about CTA buttons here. And they're just critically important for all emails. And it warrants its own principle. So it's not necessarily a principle, but I'm going to talk about some things to look out for, and also some things to incorporate moving forward. So the first one is really a no-brainer. Just make sure you actually have a CTA button. I've actually seen campaigns from well-respected retailers where it's just a big, beautiful image with actually no button, nowhere to click. So simple stuff. Make sure you have a button somewhere in your email. Let's look at the tips. Here is tactic number 1. First thing, simple stuff. Make it big. There's a little saying going around the interwebs, big buttons for big fingers, or at least in the UX community. And I actually found this interesting in some of my research here, that there actually was an MIT study for this. I don't know why it warrants an MIT study, but they dialed it in about the average size of an adult index finger. But it's great because this gives us something actionable here. We know that when we're in Klaviyo, let's try to get this thing upwards of 45 pixels. The reason being is that button will expand naturally on a mobile device and give us some good real estate to actually click. I think MIT must have been up to something because Apple has actually incorporated this into their UX guidelines for developers. Tactic number 2, nothing too advanced, but you'd be surprised how many people miss this. Use some contrasting colors. Make your buttons pop. Match them to your brand. If anything, that's going to build trust and credibility. You're going to have all your visual touch points match. You want to think of button color as a visual cue to help your prospects hone in on your CTA. If you do have multiple offers, you could always try a muted tone or gray for that secondary call to action. So this is something that drove me crazy. It sometimes still does, but I imagine it still drives some of you crazy. And it's like, where do I actually put this button? If I have these core elements like a banner image for my key product and a headline, and then all of a sudden some text, like, well, I keep hearing that I need to put everything's above the fold. Where do I actually put this button? Do I put it on the image? Do I put it above the image? Seems kind of awkward to me. So let's just talk about that for 1 minute. Well, yeah, tactic number 3 is, you want to try to get these things above the fold. And if your offer is simple enough, you should be able to do that. 5 sentences or less on that promo copy. However, if the user just needs more convincing about your offer, you don't have to get crazy or awkward or adventurous. Just put the button below the copy. Here is tactic number 4. Again, what we're talking about is just buttons, CTA buttons. Tactic number 4, this is another visual hack. Just add some white space around the button. That's totally okay. If anything, it's going to give some breathing room and signify its importance. Just a word of warning. I see this a lot, people using images as buttons. And you want to be careful with that in case the user's email client is not loading images. I know that's a rare instance these days, but it's still something we want to avoid. Don't use images as buttons. Similarly, if you do use an HTML button, like the one in the Klaviyo editor, you're kind of good to go, basically. That's going to expand and contract naturally across all mobile devices, so your work is done. So what about copy? And I know at the beginning of this talk I said, hey, I'm not going to talk about personalization, subject lines, and persuasive copywriting. All that stuff is super, super important. But I do think it's worth touching upon a few hacks, if you will, for button copy. First and foremost, tactic 1, use action-oriented text. I'd urge you to get a little bit more adventurous and deviate from the standard shop now, buy now, click here. That stuff's a little boring. Here's a little pro tip. Cater to the ego. So unbounce, tested and changed button text from the second person to the first person on their CTAs. So they're running a subscription, start your free trial, start my free trial, and they get a 90% increase in clicks. I mean, this is huge, and there's a huge body of research I'd urge you to check out, but I just wanted to plant the seed there that this is a design component that you could play with and test with, especially if you're running a subscription business. I think this is especially important. So again, test and compare this stuff. See what works. All right. Design principle number 4. This one's going to be a quick one, but I want to just talk about engaging with imagery, which sometimes is fairly subjective, but there are some tools out there we can use moving forward to help lift our conversions. Tactic number 1 is called directional cues. And again, this is a little bit more advanced, and it would probably necessitate a little bit more thought moving forward and maybe some, you know your way around Photoshop, but it's actually putting in some kind of cue, either an arrow, or you've seen this before where you have a picture of some people and they're actually looking at the CTA button. That's what I would call a directional cue. Tactic number 2 is animated GIFs. I know we've seen this a million times. By the way, animated GIFs, I think they're like 31 years old as of this year, which I think is crazy that they've been around that long. I feel like they're, 5 years maybe, but 31 years animated GIFs have been around. But there's something to them, and it's kind of like the way we speak on the web. Email Institute found that animated GIFs in emails see an increase in click-through rate upwards of 26%. Bluefly did this little test and figured out that an animated GIF was able to lift their revenue by 12%. Here's just some examples of how we use them at my agency. A few of these are examples of our own. Create urgency, timers, things of that sort are great if you have like a promotional offer that's set to expire at a certain time. Just evoke curiosity. Starting to see this a lot now with almost like a scratch and sniff technique. And it's kind of weird that they're all going off at the same time. That wasn't planned. But if you can look at the ones on the far right, this is just a great way to, sure, we're putting in this is an email talking about social proof. It's a template for that. But animated GIFs are a great way just to jam a ton of content into a limited amount of real estate, like 10 different products. You could just have those flash before a user, and it's very dynamic. So here is one word of warning with animated GIFs, and it still holds true today. And it's basically make sure the first frame of your animated GIF has all the important messaging. The reason being is there's a limited number of email clients out there now that actually won't load the entirety of the GIF, but they will load the first frame. And lastly, just some tips for lifting your conversions with GIFs. Make sure they serve a purpose. I'd urge you not to use them just for ornamentation. Try to think outside the box and leverage them to accomplish an end goal. If you can, use them as a visual cue to move your readers to your CTA. Again, make sure that the first frame has the good stuff and keep the file size down. All right, we're coming up on our final principle, and this is mobile. And I know, everyone's like, I've heard mobile a million times. I'm about ready to go bananas, but it's true. Last 4 years, smartphone usage has increased 394%. Tablet usage is up 7,721%. And devices are changing. So there's so much happening with technology. Things are moving so fast with new devices coming out every quarter, it seems. I think just the key takeaway here is that as marketers, we need to continue to be able to design our emails with flexibility without compromising their ability to convert. This is an interesting statistic. Basically, emails that display incorrectly on a mobile device, we're only giving them about 3 seconds before we chuck it. So tactic number 1, this is also a word of warning. This is what I think this is the biggest thing I see in email design now where people are shooting themselves in the foot. It's just be really careful with text on images. The scenario I see unfolding all the time is that someone will design for desktop and they'll have a really long headline. But they don't know that when that email gets loaded on a mobile device, that long headline will then get conduced to something that's a very narrow visual medium. And what happens is you open up your phone to read that email and you completely miss the offer or the headline, or in this case, coupon codes and things of that sort. So be super careful with text on images. And while we're on coupon codes, this isn't necessarily related to design, but if you're going to use coupon codes in your email, just always use live text, because who wants to actually remember what's on an image and then try to punch that into a shopping cart to check out? People want to be able to copy paste that coupon code. So we graced upon this earlier when I talked about layouts, but use a mobile-friendly layout. And the 3 I gave you earlier lend themselves nicely to mobile layouts. Single feature, single column. On the left, this is just your one column, good all-rounder. And then what you're seeing on the right, double feature, single column, kind of like 2 inverted triangles. And this isn't necessarily a design principle per se, but I do think design does extend beyond the actual email itself. And while we're thinking in terms of the context of mobile design, this is something worth noting, and it comes down to subject lines. So tactic number 3, use a short subject line. You can see Virgin Atlantic kind of screwed the pooch, where if you're loading up that email on a subway or the T, you're going to miss out on what the offer is. Birchbox nailed it. Cool. Easy enough. 5 principles. Let's do a quick review. Principle number 1. This is reducing the cognitive load. We want to reduce offers and just simplify. Principle number 2. Lay out a clear visual hierarchy and actually guide readers to your CTA. 3, optimize CTA buttons, size, position, and color. Just the right copy, active voice. Number 4, interrupt thought patterns, get a little adventurous, Try some animated GIFs in your emails when appropriate. Again, not as ornamentation, but with intentionality. And then the big one with mobile design is watch out for text on images. Cool. So that's my talk. Thanks for having me. I think we're on questions now.
We got about 15 minutes for questions.
Hey, thanks for being here. Question about content marketing.
I know you.
If we're sending an evergreen flow that has just a lot of good information for our customers, with a little marketing snuck in at the end, based on your first principle, should I reduce the amount of the content in the email and try to get them to the blog, let's say? So the email has just less content with the goal of getting that CTA and getting into the blog, or should I keep more content on the email side?
It's tough. It's tough to definitively answer these things with one tried and true way to approach it. I think in that instance, if you're trying to sell a lot of stuff, as long as you're sending a segmented offer, you could send them to a blog article, and then maybe that's maybe your initial goal there is just to get them on site and get some visibility, get them looking at your products. But it's really hard to say there's definitively an answer there without some testing. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, just the amount of content on the page.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Blogs have plenty of content.
Yeah, I think you should still make some effort to drill it down, just by virtue of, or just because some of the other concepts there, like just shorter copy tends to win. People still have a limited amount of time that they're reading through these things. I have seen some instances where the evidence supports the contrary. It's like a very passionate user base. They're super into your product. They want to know everything about you. Maybe you're a visible founder or something like that, where they're extremely engaged and they're just eating up that content. That could be, you could still explore that, but all said, I'd urge you to go short.
It's two-part question. One, do you recommend having like navigation tabs on for your website into the email?
Right. I think, again, this is like all these things are so case sensitive, and right now I'm thinking through multiple instances where my team had a hypothesis that, hey, we're gonna yank out the navigation. Like, we're working with a client now. That was the first thing we tested because they came to us and we were like, this is a ConversionCentric email. We gotta really simplify these things. And it was actually the contrary in that case, where click-through rates plummeted. So you got to test it, but I think general rule of thumb, that's a great place to start by removing the navigation, because in my experience, people aren't really clicking on that. They're usually clicking on offers, and it's just going to add noise and extra real estate you don't need.
Okay, and just one more about image size. Is there an impact on image, comparing image size versus copy size? Does that affect anything?
In terms of like in a visual context?
Yeah.
Not that I've come across. I think it comes down to just the big picture in terms of like aesthetically how pleasing this is, and also like when you look at it on a mobile device. I mean, in the fashion industry, you see like these massive banners. Like in some instances, that's okay, but yeah, inevitably that's going to push your content down a little bit. So it's something to watch out for.
Hi, over here. Are there certain design tools that you recommend over others, whether it be Photoshop or something else?
Yeah, I mean, Photoshop is great. Sketch is, we're starting to use Sketch a lot more than Photoshop these days. But if you're just looking for a web-based tool, even like Canva is awesome. Like you can fire up Canva and do a great banner, with some images, and it looks great. And also I think it has a repository of like stock photography in there too. So if you're hurting for stock photography, that could be something to explore.
Hi. So I understand having a call to action button below the image and not putting the call to action on the image. But my understanding is people still do like to click on images. Would it not make sense to also put the link in the back end of the image as well?
Yeah, of course.
There's not a direct call to action there?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no issue with that.
Yeah, make everything clickable, for sure.
So follow up to the previous question about tools. Are there any resources you recommend for tips on like font pairings or design elements or things?
Oh man, font pairings is a big one, and I love typography. I'm trying to think of. There's one on the tip of my tongue. I can't quite remember it. Maybe I can link up with you after and tell you. But I mean, there's no shortage of these tools online. I think fonts. I mean, fonts as a whole. Fonts could warrant its own presentation because when you're using live text, which is HTML text in your Klaviyo emails, you usually want to use the actual web fonts that load, Arial, Georgia, and Times, and things like that. I mean, they're a little boring, but like that's usually what you want it to load. I find it, in my experience, sans serif fonts work the best across all devices. But if you do want to start getting creative, one easy hack you could use is using Google Fonts in your Klaviyo emails, and it just warrants a little snippet of code at the top of your email. And then you can go to Google Fonts. They have a repository of fonts on their site, and you basically link to that web font and reference it in your email. But word of warning, it's not going to come, that actual font that you're selecting for that live text isn't always going to render correctly across all devices. Most of the time it will, but that's a good way you can kind of get a little bit creative.
Hi, what are your thoughts on how long an email should be? Like, does the customer scroll down? Are they okay to scroll, or should there be a cap of messaging?
Yeah, I mean, I think people scroll more than they think they scroll, so that's okay. And I don't think you should paint yourself into a corner being like, I have to get this thing down to a certain amount of sentences, or I have to be able to see this on a mobile device. Again, I think like, if the offer is complicated and the user just needs more persuasion, it's okay to extend copy a little bit. But just keep in mind, like shorter usually wins out. And 5 sentences is kind of like the general goal here with your short, simple promo offers. So that's where I would start from. And then if it just doesn't make sense or it's too terse or you need to build on it, go for it. Yo.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Regarding imagery, do you prefer to use, or do you know of any sort of guidelines regarding, should it be action shots or should it be very bright pictures, a lot of sort of, like some filters? Are there any standards or ideas that are good to have in mind?
Yeah, I don't think there's any standards. I mean, first we start with like what matches the brand. We wouldn't want to get too adventurous with filters and things like that if it just doesn't make sense for the brand itself. If the user then ends up on the website and nothing really matches that. So usually start there. And design is somewhat subjective, so it's hard to say one's going to work, but one's going to evoke more of an emotional response from person A versus person B. So it's hard to give you like clear-cut guidelines there. Engaging imagery is, again, subjective. I would say like the key point here is just use imagery with intentionality, not as ornamentation. So think about like what are you actually trying to, what emotional response are you trying to extract from the user? What are you trying to get them to do? And if you're just throwing in images just because it looks pretty, I don't know if that's really going to accomplish your goals.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, aside from typography and like your brand color, should there be any level of consistency on your emails, like a header or a footer that you should always have so that your customer is used to seeing the email and know it's you?
Yeah, totally. Good question. And I think usually with promo emails, yeah, a consistent logo at least at the top is a good place to start. Footer, social links, things of that sort. But these rules don't necessarily apply if you're doing transactional emails or, we talked about promo emails, like big and dumb promo emails today. But when you get a little bit more granular with something like an abandoned cart, you actually want to remove some of those elements. You want to like actually remove social links, for example, because you don't want that person to go, oh, just distracted. They have a Facebook page, and then they're out of the buying mentality again, and they're off to something else. So it is, it is case sensitive. I feel like I keep saying that over again. But I think as far as promo emails are concerned, yeah, a commonality across all of them is definitely important.
Hi there. Thanks
Hi.
for coming. Great class. I have a question for you regarding how many emails do you want to be sending in a promotional type emails? Do you want to be sending in a week? We can send an acne tip each week. We could send our blog post out each week. And we had some kind of informational things like that we were hitting people with. And we kind of noticed early on that, and we had to think, well, Thursdays and Fridays, we noticed the sales were in a slump. Things went down. So we thought, well, why don't we kind of combine things and see if we can get some action happening on those slow days. So we started our Thursday sales. We've been doing it for several years, and now customers, if they don't get this email in the morning or it's delayed, they're chatting with us, they're emailing us, where's that email? So every Thursday we're offering 30% off one product that we choose. But then, so that'll be our top offer right there. Underneath, we've got an acne tip, and then we've got our little bit of a blog that we write, and we reference some products in the blog that they can choose to buy. So we're using that promo to get them to read the blog and the acne tips, and creating excitement around that, rather than sending 3 different emails each week. And it seems to be working out well for us, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
That's a complicated one. Tough to unpack that. You're talking about email fatigue to some degree. You're being conscious of people just getting pummeled with the emails and just falling off your list. I think most people's engagement with the brand is like a bell curve. Like they get really psyched about a brand, and then they're reading the emails, and then eventually it's going to decay over time, and that's natural. So starting at the top, what we always suggest is, well, just keep hitting your users with email just to make sure that you're hitting them when they're actually engaged. And they're going to fall off naturally, but keep your eye on open rates. If things start dipping below 15%, like that's definitely scary territory. Another thing I'd offer up is like, what about like a preference panel where people can dial in, like, hey, I want to get promos, I want to get tips, or the content that you're pushing out. Those are ways that you can start to dial in those emails so they're just more effective.
And so would you say to send more emails in a week, or how many emails in 1 week?
Trying to pin me down? It's hard for me to weigh in there, not knowing like what your list is like. And
our opening rate is, we're close to 40% open rate.
That's great. I'd say you could
maintaining that excitement for that one email a week.
I'd keep pushing it.
Okay.
The one thing that I am concerned about is just promo, like especially discount. Like that's kind of just like a race to the bottom. I don't know what the competitive landscape is like in your place. Maybe it does make sense.
Yeah.
But I see that so often where a retailer would just have like 20% off, and it's every week or every day, and it's just, it's not really accomplishing much and eating into your margins, and people are just expecting that.
All right, we have time for about 2 more questions.
So kind of on a similar note with, brands that have a lot of informational or guides or how-to, content, have you done any experimenting or seen anything where instead of including, 4 blog articles that, here's how to groom your beard or whatever, just drilling that down to just one and just trying to get people to go to that one article, and then maybe increasing the frequency of the emails to include the other ones?
Got it. I haven't done that in the context of content, 4 content articles versus 1. My presumption is that the same thing would apply, and we'd also go back to what I just referenced with this one, where like maybe it's an opportunity where you could offer up some like a preference panel so they can really dial in what they want to receive and the frequency that they would want to receive it. I would experiment against that. That's one piece of content, just easier to consume.
Hello.
Yep.
I seen some brands that have gone with plain text emails, and I was talking to some guys today, and they said that for their A/B testing, that was the best performers. Do you recommend when you need to go to that route?
Do I recommend? Yeah, do I recommend plain text emails? Heck yeah. Like, in my experience, it's shocking how often they outperform the entirety of what I was just talking about with visual emails. But what I do also see is that sometimes there's a spike in engagement and then it falls off. And my hypothesis is that basically you're just interrupting a pattern, and they get an email from a brand that they're normally receiving, something that's heavy on the visuals, and all of a sudden they're engaged. So it could be the efficacy. My sense is that it decays over time. And then another thing is you got to think about like your brand and what you're all about. If you're a fashion-based brand or something that's highly visual with a passionate user base, I think visuals kind of make sense. If it's something else, the plain text emails are definitely worth exploring or just swapping in full time.
Awesome. Matt, thank you. Super useful. Very tactical strategy.
Thanks.